Welcome to SEEK Bytes, a podcast for software engineers by software engineers. In today's episode, Elliott, Raph, and myself, Will, ask the question, who can a developer trust? We cast some doubts on trust between CDNs, issue reporters, maybe even yourself. But we won't leave you high and dry. We also mention why a little bit of skepticism is healthy as a software engineer. Welcome, Raph. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
No problem.
Good to be back.
Yeah, 'tis the season to be sickness, really. Unfortunately, it's going around, so we've got Raph over Zoom today coming in. So apologies if there's any disruptions in audio. But Raph wanted to share a new section of this program called Spot the Bug. Raph, do you want to walk us through what you got? Tell us what's happening. We're a little bit in the dark as well, but excited to hear.
Yeah, I saw this during a pull request review yesterday. I was looking through some code, and I thought it was a pretty cool one to share. And I realized this is a podcast, so it's going to be a bit hard to read out the code to you. But
I was wondering how it's going to go, but I'm excited to hear.
But I could just read them out and then kind of try to explain in simple terms what it is. So let me start off, So we have a function that is, it's called update. I'll give you a bit of context as well. So the task is that we are going to update some promo codes. So promo codes is a record in our database, and there's a bunch of fields of properties, such as, when is it valid to, when is it valid from, what's the status of a promo code, all this sort of stuff. Now, our task is to extend this to be able to update a new field called redemptions or redemptions count. So our current function here in the code base, so if you're the developer, you just picking up this task, you would read it and it says, update promo code function. It's a function, and it takes in a few parameters, and there are a bunch of optionals. The reason being is you might want to update just one field, like valid to, or you might just want to update status, or you might want to update both or many at the same time. And then inside the function, after it takes in those optional properties, it would append update expressions for DynamoDB to set those values, for example. So the code looks kind of like this inside the in the meat of it, inside the function. It's like if the status exists, so if open bracket status close bracket, then you append the string to update the status. Now, if valid from, then you append the string valid from to set the valid from to whatever is provided. So being the developer coming in here, you probably do the same thing. You probably just do if redemption count, append the string, append it to update expression. So for example, if this update function gets called with valid from and valid to, the update expression will have like a string saying update valid to and valid from will be set to whatever you provided. Cool. Now another context.
I think I see where this is going. I've run into this sort of bug before. I'm gonna wait for you to say it, but I strongly suspect I know where this one's going.
And I knew you're going to spot it straight away, even without looking at the code and me explaining. So another context I should give you also is that valid to and valid from is a string, optional string, and redemption count is an optional number. So it can be value from 0 to 100 or undefined, for example.
Lots of optionals.
Lots of optionals because it's an update function, right? Cool. So, being keen to finish this task, you just kind of copy the code from previously, like if valid to, then append a string. You kind of copy that and then say if redemption counts exists, then you append a string with redemption counts, right? Cool. Set, done. Cool. Now, has anyone spotted anything funky, or you think something would not work. Either you, Elliot, or Will.
You go, Elliot. You've clearly spotted it.
Yeah, I think for
Well,
for some context, it's probably worth noting that we're thinking about TypeScript, right? So we're in JavaScript land where we have truthy and falsy values, right? So we're talking about optionals. So optionals can be undefined, null. Maybe you default to 0, and if you're saying if blah exists, well, 0 is going to falsy, right? And so if you've got an if condition and it goes falsy, it's not going to enter. So if you're providing, hey, I need to set my max redemptions to 0, and it goes to falsy, it's like, well, it's not going to append that update, is it? Whereas what you actually want to be is like, is my thing defined? So you want it to be not undefined or not null, right? If that was the way you were checking it. That's my knee-jerk reaction in not seeing it.
Correct, Elliot. Correct. So this seems like it works because following the same kind of pattern as the other ones. But yes, correct. The redemption count can be the number 0, and if you do a check, if redemptions count, then append. Now, if redemption count is the value 0, 0 is falsy in JavaScript land, so it won't append that value to your update statement, which means that your database won't get updated with the value of 0 for redemption count. Cool.
So the really interesting, like this is, I've seen it a million times before, right? Super common as a thing. Even if you're in a slightly stronger typed language such as C#, you might try to do something like that, and C# is going to be like, no, you need to tell me what are you comparing, right? It's not just going to falsy, and so you'd just be saying like, well, it has a value, right? You'd be like dot value does not equal blah, or dot has value, and it wouldn't matter what the value is. You just say it's assigned. But the interesting thing about writing it in this kind of way, where you've got lots and lots of optionals, is one, every time you add a new field, potentially you're adding a new optional if you're just copying the existing code, but then also the whole truthy falsy thing. But also, what if undefined or null is a thing? Like, what if you want to just like remove the value and you're just saying if property? And it's like, well, that's never going to work now. So one of the solutions to this, which before I say that one of the potential solutions, I imagine you probably have one of those. So why don't we hear what you have to say about that one, Raph, first before I say mine?
Yeah, I'm keen to hear if there's any more to this problem and your solution as well, Raph.
No, that was about it. I mean, that's how the append statement. Well, that's how the update statement didn't get appended, because the value could be 0 for that case. So a way to do is not just check truthy falsy, but just check if it's undefined, not undefined. Sorry, then you append it.
One of the solutions I've seen to this problem, not the only solution, but one of them is, instead of passing in optional values, instead what you do is you pass in an object, and what you do is you loop over the keys and you say, whatever keys you provide me, that's what I'm going to go ahead and update. So, the object may have no keys, and you're like, okay, I'm not going to update anything. Or the object may say, oh, I'm going to set, the to date is going to be completely removed. So I'm going to provide that key, but not provide a value. Leave it as undefined specifically, or set it to null or empty string. And so then all you do is you loop over the keys and say, look, for each key that you provided me, I'm going to go ahead and append it to this value. And then you kind of get around the whole truthy falsy problem.
Very cool. Nice. Very, very interesting, Raph. Yeah, it's fun. It's always interesting trying to explain code over with no visuals. I thought that was interesting. I'm glad you were able to pick up on that as well, Elliot.
I actually wondered. I don't know. I was having a shower thought about this, and I was listening to a book, a Warhammer 40k book, and one of the particular characters in the scene was blind. Right, had gone blind, and they one of their favorite pastimes had been like reading, and they had to travel a lot for work, so they'd visit places and see beautiful scenery and stuff, and they're like, both of those things had been robbed from them because they were blind. And I kind of wondered, I was like, if I went blind, I don't know if I'd still be able to be a software engineer. Like, it's like, because like UIs and stuff update all the time, and I was like, how would I, like, you get dropped in a new code base, it's like, how do you navigate a new code base if you can't see? Like,
where's the UI without the eyes?
I'm just like, oh man, you know, I don't know, but like I feel like people talk about that. That's one of the jobs you could do, even if you were blind, right? But I was like, I mean, you could learn Braille and then, I don't know, somehow have something that allows you to read Braille from text, right? But I was like, I imagine that would be really bloody difficult.
Plug yourself into the computer.
Yeah.
Just edit code that way.
I think that might have to be the way. Yeah, you just USB port into your brain, like Detroit, become human style. I don't know. Yeah, it would be tough. I mean, I feel like that's a whole world. Like particularly with the front end development and stuff, ARIA labels and all that stuff. Accessibility is a huge thing, but not having to rely on those accessibility features myself probably, means that I don't really know what it's like using them. And
Absolutely.
Coding, being maybe a blind coder, but perhaps there are people out, I don't know, but I don't even know what that world would look like.
Yeah, totally. Because like hearing Raph talk about it, it's like, oh yep. I can kind of picture what's happening here, but it's like, if you were trying to do that solo, and you've got text to speech or you've got some form of, visual feedback, whether it's Braille or whatever. I was like, I can imagine that being really difficult and I'll say this because typos are the bane of my existence, right? The amount of times I've introduced bugs or, I'm banging my head against something trying to figure out what's going on. It's like some simple typo somewhere, whether it's a question mark that shouldn't be there or some other such thing. I can't imagine how frustrating that would be if you were blind, trying to figure that out. Hopefully we never have to find out.
You should note those down as well and bring it up on the next bugs of the week.
Yeah, I like it. I did find something real quick. I can share it here.
All right.
So here, I just found, this is on Reddit, so take all of this with a grain of salt. But this person asked a similar question: blind and visually impaired programmers, how do you do it? And the top reply is, I worked for a while with a completely blind programmer. It was a software company, and he was one of the founders and the only programmer before I was hired. He used a Braille display which attached below the keyboard. It showed one 40-column line of text. He could work very rapidly with it, easily scrolling long distances in source files while holding a hand on the left end of the Braille display. He was also very comfortable using job control in the shell, so he could quickly switch back and forth between his editor, the shell, a man page, etc. And on his work computer, he never started up X. He just ran everything in the console. He had a monitor attached sitting on a chair next to the table in case he needed to show something to somebody. For web access and email, I think he often used a smartphone, BlackBerry he was using, with a screen reader on low volume, holding it close to his ear, holding it close to his face to hear it. So, apparently it is possible, but that's commitment. That is someone who loves what they do.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be hard to not be a programmer. It's a pretty awesome job. Like being an engineer is pretty great. So, that was the first I've ever heard of electronic Braille devices. I didn't realize that was a thing, but I guess to be able to read code and stuff like that, it must exist. Very fascinating. Thanks for sharing, Raph. Are you gonna stick around? Or are you gonna pop off?
You know what? I'll just sit back and listen, and if I start coughing a bit too much, I will drop off. Thank you.
No
worries,
problem.
Man. You feel better soon. Thanks for jumping in for that. I don't know if we'll call it bug of the week or this week in bug news or
this week in
spot the bug.
This week when I broke production.
I like it. This week in bugs. Speaking of bugs,
we had an interesting one that went into production actually. Mm-hmm. Code reviewed, looked fine. Classic mistake though, there was no test written to validate the case. But basically, it was a typo for setting up a redirect URL to get you back and to be like, oh hey, so there was a user experience issue where it was like you want to go and purchase a thing, you select the thing you want to purchase, and then it redirects you to the checkout page. But it's like, oh, you're not logged in, so I've got to redirect you to the auth page and then back. But it would redirect you back to the original page, so you've lost your selected product. And I was like, that's kind of poor UX. Like, that's annoying. It's an additional click. And I was like, well, I mean, if that happened to me personally, I'd be like, fine, stuff you. Like, I just get annoyed kind of out of principle. So I was like, we should fix that. It's not a good user experience. So everything looked good, and I think it was tested. But what happened then was it would redirect, but then it would use an ampersand instead of a question mark for the URL parameters. And so then that just basically broke and 404 forward. But it was only a subset of users, and I was like, classic. Like a typo, like everything looked fine in the code, and presumably it was tested on local dev and worked. But I was like, it's, and after it was kind of fixed and found, I kind of dropped a little, and I was like, so maybe we should write a test case for this scenario to like validate that looks like we expect it to look. So we'll see if that happens.
Yeah.
But
the interesting thing is also that I think it would still work in the branch. So what I mean by that is when you deploy something here at Seek, you can test the UI by going to the adding like a query param and the branch name. Branch equals, my build, whatever.
Yeah, UIV, I believe that's called. UI version.
Yeah. Of course, that makes perfect sense. Testing it on the UIV. Yeah.
Yeah, the ampersand will work there because ampersand after the query params question mark is just adding extra, parameters. Whereas if it's just the one, then you need to have a question mark because that's the first one.
So the fix they put in by replacing that ampersand with a question mark, that should actually break UIV as well.
Possibly, yeah. It's a good one. Let's have a look into that.
Yeah, I know my vague knowledge of how URL constructors work. There are URL constructors in JavaScript that you can just like pass in all the things and it can like make your query param. But anyway, there are definitely ways around that. In this podcast, I wanted to cover three other things. There were two other bugs that I wanted to touch on, and also how we can try and avoid bugs with, I'll get into how a little bit later.
It's Bugs Week.
It's Bugs Week. It absolutely is. The first one I wanted to cover was a polyfill.js. Well, this isn't really a bug, maybe more of an attack, I guess. But this did affect us at Seek. So, has anyone used polyfill.js or heard of it?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
So, for anyone who doesn't know, it was essentially a way to add polyfills into your site. Now, it's not really necessary anymore. We have tooling that can bundle polyfills in automatically, and a lot of browsers just support things out of the box for the most part. So, it's not a tool that's needed anymore. But some sites still rely on it. And so what happened was this company, Polyfill.js, was sold to a Chinese company who had very little presence in the developer world. And there was some skepticism if they would handle the migration properly and look after it safely and in good care. And unfortunately, they did not. Soon after, they started injecting scripts into. So polyfill.js, it'd be entered into your site with a script tag with query parameters with what polyfills you want, and so they were injecting their own malicious data into websites that would take you to betting websites and etc. And Google started picking up on that, and then anyone who had those websites, all of their ads were taken down. All their paid Google ads were then being taken down if your site had that. And that happened to a few of our campaigns here at Seek.
What is a polyfill, Will?
What is a polyfill? So a polyfill adds a feature to a website that adds a feature to a browser that doesn't support it. What's a good one? So
I've got a great example for you here of using polyfills. So I once, many, many moons ago, was tasked with creating, and at the time, we had all the fancy browsers. We had Chrome, we had Safari, we had Firefox. We had clients who were still using IE6.
Yeah, Internet Explorer is definitely the big one for polyfills.
I had to make the startup kind of sitemap page IE6 compliant, matching the design. It's just like it's just missing some of the features that we need. You're like, it just can't do that. Mm-hmm. And so polyfill was basically used to fix that problem.
Yeah, one I can think of is like sticky as a position. For a long time, that wasn't supported by a lot of Internet Explorer particularly, but for a lot of browsers. And so you could add a polyfill that essentially patches that feature. Which is, pretty cool. But nowadays we don't, like, a lot of our tooling can do that for you. Like your bundling will typically handle that for you. You just say what browser you want, and it'll add any polyfills it needs. So what happened was it wasn't our sites, it wasn't our code that included the polyfill. It was actually an external party. We have on some of our Asia sites a little chatbot, and that chatbot had an iframe, which then included the polyfill. But it's crazy. It affected over 100,000 websites. It was a very large attack, and just kind of goes to show that you really can't trust every platform. I don't know. You know, your own code is one thing. Obviously, third parties are always a risk, and you always have to be mindful that any of their code they use could be a way for other people to attack your stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was reading something about this this morning when it comes to using open source software, right? Like even he was saying that there was some almost critical backdoor that was added to Linux because there was a particular, I'm just going to say package, it's the wrong term, but package that was being maintained by this guy, and he just couldn't keep maintaining it, right? And so like slowly, piece by piece, in all these separate PRs that it's like, oh, that makes sense in this context, were added, but bit by bit, it was adding a backdoor, and once you combine them all together, it's like, oh snap, you've just added a backdoor to every single Linux system that installs this thing. And I think it was caught before it went completely out the door, but it was just like, yeah, like each thing in isolation was apparently like, oh yeah, that makes sense, that's justified, like, yep. Okay, maybe it was a bit odd, but it was like, no, it makes sense in this context. And it was just like, man, like there are definitely incredibly smart, malicious actors out there who, and if you're playing the long game, it's like, it doesn't matter if it takes you 6 months to get piece by piece your, you know, Trojan horse into wherever, but it's like, that's absolutely always the risk with any sort of open source software, or even like downloading from a CDN, for example. It's like, you know, there is potentially the risk that CDN gets compromised and the file you thought you were downloading is actually downloading a different file, or a file that provides all that functionality but is malicious.
That's exactly the case for polyfill. For the CDN stuff. I do want to talk about the open source thing just a moment, but just to cap off the polyfill stuff, if the fix for that was they just had to move over to Cloudflare's CDN. They had an exact like copy, essentially. It was just simply is changing the URL from polyfill to Cloudflare, I believe it was. But onto the next one, and the next topic that I wanted to cover on this bugs / I guess malicious things is an open source things and security vulnerabilities. So there was a package. Let me find the name of this. It's called Node-IP. It was used. Let's see how many stars it has at the moment. Node-IP. It's got 1.5 thousand stars and many millions of downloads. People were reporting security vulnerabilities for this package, and the developers were getting an excessive amount of them. But the severity of this security vulnerability was quite low. However, it was being reported as like a 9.8 out of 10, like a crazy vulnerability. However, to be able to exploit it, you would almost need magic to happen. It certainly was bad, but it couldn't be exploited very easily. And so the developer was just, not touching it for a while. He has fixed it now, but because of the amount of requests that people kept putting in and just not realizing how... not realizing the context of this issue, the developer has archived their project, and so now it's a read-only project, just to stop people filing issues.
Wow.
Yeah, which I think is crazy. That and this is me just trying to cast more doubt on things you can trust. Like even security vulnerabilities that may be high or critical may not always be the case. I mean, you of course need to have trust somewhere. But you do have to be cautious that people may be reporting false vulnerabilities, and that can be malicious for sure. Have you guys ever encountered something like that where you've found a vulnerability that doesn't seem as impactful as it seems? Probably
question.
rare for others. It's hard to push back on a vulnerability, right?
That's a really good question. My mind's kind of going blank. I've seen and been at companies where we've had vulnerabilities, such as like, SQL injection, right, in PHP and stuff like that. There was one particular like security breach at a company I was at many years ago. Not SEEK, just putting it out there. It wasn't SEEK. Not that SEEK's perfect, but like it was another company. Anyway, we got an email one day and it was basically just a dump of our database, and we were like, "What? Okay." And we were like, "What do we do with that?" And then they emailed us back again. I don't know, a couple of weeks or a month later, and they were like, "I still have access." And we're like, "Okay." And there was like some text at the bottom of the email that was like the name of the tool they'd used to pull out the data. And basically there was this malicious tool, and you could run it against a website and it would just check all the PHP variables being injected and then see if one was unsecured. And then like the tool itself then set up the connection to the database, queried for all the, tables that it could read from and all the schemas and all of this stuff. So you as the malicious actor didn't have to do any of that. The tool did that for you. All you literally had to do was input the name of the PHP variable.
Yeah, interesting. I think where I was going with my previous thing, in summary, it's really about the balance of reporting incidents and understanding the capacity to maintain something as well. So where is a balance? I'm taking this from an article. Reoccurring incidents like these raise the question: how does one strike a balance? Relentlessly reporting theoretical vulnerabilities can leave open source developers, many of whom are volunteers, exhausted from triaging noise. On the flip side, would it be ethical if security practitioners, including novices, sat on what they thought was a security flaw so as not to inconvenience a maintainer? A third problem arises as well for projects that don't have any active maintainers. Abandoned software that may not have been touched in years can contain vulnerabilities that, even when disclosed, will never be fixed. So there's really no simple answer exists to how to best kind of solve the problem of there being vulnerabilities and potential vulnerabilities and fixing them all without kind of overburdening project maintainers, particularly for open source code. Until the security research, developer, and vendor communities come together to identify an effective solution, developers are bound to get frustrated with bogus reports burning them out. And interesting thing, I don't contribute much or at all to open source, so it's hard for me to really have an input on that, but I can understand how that can be tough. Particularly, I don't contribute a lot to open source, but I like contributing just throughout our packages here at SEEK, and just maintaining our own internal packages that are used throughout is can be tough with requests coming in all over the place.
Yeah, maintaining that sort of stuff is hard and full time. I've done a handful of PRs for open source repos in my life, like very, very few. Part of that's the imposter syndrome, like just being like, no, I'm not good enough to do that. Some of it's general laziness. I know I've for one of the open source things, it was downloading like a version of Node, and we needed a different version of Node, right? I think it would just like download the latest version. It was called NWJS, if memory serves. And basically what it did is allowed you to wrap your web app in basically an executable, almost. We wrapped it in an executable, but it would basically download Node and allow you to just execute it without needing Node installed on your system or anything like that. So it was really good for like older computers and versions of XP and yada, yada, yada. Kind of like Electron. That's
what I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah, it made it like a functional, it seemed like a desktop app, but it was actually just running a website. Anyway, what it was doing is it was just downloading the latest version of Node that was available. And we needed an older version because XP just wouldn't, for whatever reason, support a newer version. And some of, our clients had really, really old machines. And it was just like, well, they need the website. So I was like, well, we need to fix this, and we're not getting away from NWJS, so I had to submit a PR, and I was like, I'll just inject the version that we want it to run when we install. And the solution I'd used was kind of subpar, but I was like, I mean, it gets the job done. The maintainer was like, we're not doing that. That's crazy. And I was like, oh, fair enough. They thankfully, they were very receptive and they helped us. They had a much better solution, which was injecting it with an environment variable.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, yeah, as opposed to like 4 layers of prop drilling. But, I was younger at the time, the hubris was still there.
That's great. I mean, that's how that's such a big part of the learning as well. Like contributing to, from what I've heard, contributing to open source is a lot of that. Your reach and the amount of people who can then see what you're doing and suggest other things is a lot larger.
Yeah. Well, because I was like, I mean, it works, like, seems fine. It's not really a problem. And it was like, yeah. In retrospect, like, if I was to see that kind of PR now, I'd look at that and I'd be like, yeah, we could probably do this better. Like, it's fine and it does work, but it's fine. Yeah,
but it sounded like there was a problem there to solve, and although technically it wasn't the right solution, like it
wasn't the best solution.
Yeah. But the problem was fixed regardless.
That's it.
And I think that's like understanding those problems is a very important thing to know, particularly as as you grow in your career. Like, understanding the problem is a big part of coding.
Yeah.
And then the solution aspect is another whole part. I wanted to move on to this last little topic. So hopefully I've cast a little bit of doubt on trusting everything you see and work on as an engineer. So we've touched on CDNs may be untrustworthy. Open source, you can't always trust it. Even security vulnerabilities may not be trustworthy.
Issue reports maybe?
Yes. Issue reports may not be trustworthy. There you go. That's much better. So here's the statement. Programmers should never trust anyone, not even themselves. Maybe perhaps a little bit controversial, but I'm pulling this from an article I read this morning by Sung Kim. We'll post a link in the description. But this is a great little article that I wanted to go over about being a little paranoid in your code and how it can maybe help you be a little bit better. So let's start off with, is code correct? Programmers should be... Let's start off with that programmers should be a little bit paranoid. I double check code passes tests, the reviewers approve my code. Not having any of those things could, of course, lead to bugs. But writing code correctly is hard, and verifying the code correctness is even harder. Reasons why is that generality. Even if code behaves correctly once, will it do it for all cases, for all machines all the time? Next is false pass. Failing tests indicate the presence of bugs, but passing tests do not promise their absence. And finally, lack of certainty. You could write a formal proof of your code's correctness, but now you must wonder if the proof is correct. And that chain could cycle forever. So it's folly to pursue a certainty of your code's correctness. A bug may be hiding in a dependency that you'll never find. What do you think about that?
You can write tests to verify behavior, and you can have such confidence that the thing does what it's supposed to do and that it is bug-free, but then a user does something you never expected or you never thought of, right? And you don't know what you don't know, right? So you're going, oh, but it tested. I've done it. I've got 100% coverage. And so I often think of it when people talk about code coverage, like the mythical 100% code coverage, don't bother. It's not worth it. Like if you show me a code base and you say, we've got 100% code coverage, my first reaction is BS. Like that's not covering 100% of your cases.
Well, yeah, I think like having that as a goal, because I think you're absolutely on the right. You're absolutely right. And I think it's because code coverage doesn't mean bug-free.
Yes.
Right? Just because you have got 100% coverage doesn't mean there are no bugs. It just means that you've tested all the paths, but yeah, and you're totally right with that. what Sun Kim then moves on to talking about is abstractions, as to like why bugs can occur and why we should be skeptical, because a lot of that, what we know of as a coder, as an engineer, and even what with the tools we use are abstractions of other concepts, of other tools and stuff like that. How do you? I'm going to define abstractions, but how do you see abstractions? What are they to you?
Yeah, great question. So, it's a separation between you and the thing that you're talking to, right? I'm trying to think.
Yeah, because
example.
I think you're talking about like technical abstraction, and that is definitely one thing, and that's exactly right. It's a way to remove some of the complexity or hide that complexity.
Yeah, an analogy, for example, is an abstraction usually, right? You know, you take, here's this really complicated scenario, and you're like, I'll give you an analogy. You've just abstracted the thing away to try and get the same message across. Right?
And that's cognitive abstraction. And that's a little bit different. And what we'll probably talk a little bit more here is that type of abstraction, that kind of cognitive, that understanding by removing the parts that are difficult and you don't need to know to understand a difficult topic. Things we do day to day, we abstract.
Absolutely.
For example, banking, we understand it as we're just transferring one place to another, you know, withdrawing. But behind the scenes, banks are doing a lot of things, taking out loans. Yeah. They've got a lot of things that we just never have to worry about. Time is another one as well. We think of time as the same for everyone, everywhere. But if you're working on space things, which are out in orbit, which have milliseconds of delays daily, they have to adjust for that. You know, those are the things that we just don't need to worry about, though, unless you're working on space science.
Well, my brother-in-law is actually a theoretical physicist.
Jeez, you got historians, physicists.
Yeah, I'm the dumb one of the family.
You get the podcast though.
That's right. I've got the podcast, so that's what counts. So yeah, he's done that, like, because occasionally they've been like, hey, why does this happen? That's weird, right? And then he starts, you know, trying to dumb down a concept, and I'm like, I know nothing about physics.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like when you start talking about like space and this and that, I'm always in awe of the engineers. And I'm saying engineers rather than developers, but the engineers who like put somebody on the moon with the processing power of the computers they had, right? Like an 8-bit computer or whatever it was. It's like it blows my mind the amount of technology is growing when you say like the phone that we have, right, in our palms right now is more powerful than all of the computing power on the planet when they put somebody on the moon.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's insane.
Like, it's crazy.
Why can't my phone take me to the moon? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like, well, I mean, it probably has the computing power, but it doesn't have the firmware written, right?
Yeah, it doesn't have the combustion power.
Yeah.
So
maybe one day.
Yeah, I hope so. Wouldn't that be nice? So if we talk about abstractions in our coding as a software engineer, abstractions can come in the form of our language, basic language features, loops, if conditions, function statements. These are all abstractions of lower level code. Hardware details as well. They're abstractions of like hardware details and OS details and stuff like that we don't need to. As a JavaScript developer, you typically day to day don't need to understand how the call stack works. You use promises which handle all that. It abstracts that away.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I think some of what you said, I'd argue some of those might be more concepts, but I think you're right as well. It's like a loop is a concept, but a loop is also an abstraction of what's actually happening under the hood in the language.
That's right. The language, but even the operating system, like how does the operating system do that?
Well, eventually it becomes binary, right? And then it becomes electrons on a circuit board, right? That goes through a logic gate. And when you start talking that low, I'm like, my brain switches off. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not an electrical engineer, and I do not understand like how CPUs really work.
And that is the exact point that we're kind of getting to, is that the abstractions we use are abstractions of other abstractions. It goes lower and lower until you finally get into the atoms and all that stuff. It's things that we would never have to know. and that in some of those levels, abstractions can fail. For example, your car. We know cars work. For us, it's we press ignition, we press go, we press accelerate, the car moves, etc. like that, which works in the short term.
Unless you're driving a Cybertruck.
Unless you're driving a Cybertruck, yep. Which works in the short term, but then eventually your car's going to have to need an oil replacement, which our understanding of the simple abstractions don't help us with that. We'd have to go a level deeper to understand how does the engine work, where does the oil go, etc. Like all that stuff. Language abstractions are not enough if you care about code performance. To speed up your code, you need to know hardware level or OS level details, for example.
And I'll just stop you on that one.
Yeah.
Because a little plug here for one of our other episodes of SEEK Bytes, if you haven't listened to it, with our special guest, Ren Shao, where he told us a perfect example of that abstraction. We were talking about the L1 cache. And that's something I never think about. I never think about the L1 cache. And you're like, what is the L1 cache? And it's like, oh, it's memory on your CPU. And you're like, oh, okay. And if you use a particular property in Java, it will store stuff on the L1 cache. So you might never know that. You're like, oh, I wrote Java and, I've written Java for 15 years. And you're like, great. Could you tell me what writes the L1 cache and what doesn't? And the person may be like, no. I couldn't have told you that, I think it was a dictionary and the key writes to the cache and whatever in this example. But anyway, check out that episode with Ren Shao.
But these like failings of abstractions have been called leaky abstractions. I don't know if you've ever heard that term. I've heard it and I've never understood it. Is that any such failing in its abstraction is a leaky abstraction? So there's the law of leaky, the law of leaky abstractions, which is all non-trivial abstractions to some degree are leaky, which is similar to the maximum of statistics. All models are wrong, but some are useful. So when we write code, we use leaky abstractions all the time. For example, we've already mentioned a couple, but garbage collection takes away the burden of worrying about memory management, unless you care about latency. There are some other things like C++ smart pointers make memory safe as long as you don't store any raw pointers. Hash tables are fast because they have O1 operations, but arrays are faster for smaller sizes. There's many places where abstractions can fail and which are leaky. They have their their pitfalls.
And when we talk about that hash map one, for example, you say, oh, it's O1. You're like, okay, so we're talking O being big O in notation when we're talking about the computation complexity. And you're like, oh, it's really fast. And you're like, yeah, but is there anything faster? It's like, no, it's O1. It's like, well, I mean, if you're using a dictionary in Java and it writes the L1 cache, it's going to be faster to fetch there than it is to be from the heap or from the hard drive. So it's like, so knowing the underlying implementation of the language that you're in, that makes the difference. So even though you're like, well, it is O1, it's like, yes, but,
you're absolutely like understanding, like learning, taking the time to learn that extra level is important and is something we're also leading to. Like, I'm glad you're picking this up. Fortunately, though, a lot of the leaky abstractions that we have in our day-to-day code, we'll just crash our code, which is great. Some of them will have like underlying effects though. So let's talk about trying to understand abstractions, which we kind of touched on. Is that should we try and understand all the abstraction levels? Of course not. Because like we said before, abstractions have abstractions of other abstractions infinitely deep, essentially. So we shouldn't use all of our time to keep understanding every single level of abstraction. So we need to trust some things. A programmer should have trust but verify policy. Some examples: trust the information that people tell you, but verify it with what the documentation says. Even with refactoring, you can refactor and still have tests pass, but maybe the code is slower. The test might not be testing for performance. That's something
absolutely.
like that. What's another one? Submitting a code change and see no problem in the service the next day. Make sure that there was actually a rollout. Make sure that it's even deployed. And you've already mentioned the unknown unknowns, right? Which is where a lot of these abstractions fail for us because we don't know what we don't know, right?
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, you might know the things I don't. So this is kind of a larger topic, but there are these unknowns come in three different things. There's the knowns, the things you know. The known unknowns are things you know you don't know. And then the unknown unknowns, the things you don't know that you don't know, right?
Yep.
And these unknown unknowns are the root of abstraction failures and the reason why programmers can never accurately predict how long a project will take. And there's no surefire way to catch unknown unknowns when they're around, but we should check at least one layer of abstraction to look for them, to help try and mitigate them. Especially when a project requires learning something new, you should always learn more than you need to. Doing so will mitigate the risk of being surprised by abstraction failures.
If you're integrating with a new, say, third-party application or project, right, and you just assume it does what it's supposed to do based on what somebody's told you, you haven't gone and learned what the program's actually done, what the documentation or this or that say. And it might be closed source, so you can't look at the code. But the more you learn about it will help you understand how it's meant to work. And then you can verify if it does what it's supposed to do. And that learning more will help you understand that, yes, I know when I interact with a system in a certain way, it does this, which is what it says it does. Or it might be subtly different, but it's like, okay, it's close enough.
No, spot on. Yeah. Reading source code, like you said, is super important it's really a great way to learn a level deeper in abstractions. Again, same as reading documentation, not just reading the bare minimum, but reading a little bit more for what you're working on. Conferences as well have a lot of conferences a good way because they go into not just the abstraction, they usually go a little bit deeper as well. And learning at least one layer of abstraction lower than you need. So learning about maybe how a compiler is optimized. If you're running a service, learn about the orchestration platform like Kubernetes, we have our own platform here, and just like learning how that kind of is set up is good to understand just to eliminate bugs.
If you're using SQL Server, find out how the query plan works. Like, how is your query plan being generated? What does it actually mean? Like, what's a loop? What's a spool? What's this? Like, so important. Because, like, knowing how to write SQL, you're like, sure, I can write SQL, and it works. And it's like, yeah, but there is implications based on what happens. And then there's the query plan, and there's the actual execution. And then you get stuff like, the cardinality estimator, and you're like, what's the cardinality estimator? Like, well, you should probably look that up because it's kind of important.
So to conclude and to round out this topic and this podcast, abstractions are necessary as they allow us to think efficiently, but they are treacherous as they can make it appear that we know enough. Programmers who learn superficially will not succeed in difficult projects that come without known solutions and involving multiple domains and expertise. But that said, the ideal put forth, but saying we need to always dig deeper and look at another abstraction lower, isn't always possible in reality. Time constraints, the amount of time we have in a day may not be the amount of time we actually have to do that. And we also can't expect for beginners, for example, to be so thorough. The ideals should be balanced with real-world considerations and vice versa. Real-world considerations should be balanced up against ideals. And finding that, hopefully... finding that right balance can help eliminate bugs, but always be curious, always be cautious, always maybe be a little bit skeptical. I think when you're coding.
Totally.
Hope this podcast, if anything, has taught you to press doubt sometimes. Trust but verify.
Absolutely. And you never know what the next heartbleed bug is going to be. So
Yeah, and this isn't just for writing correct code, but this is also just for your own personal development as well, right? Just looking that extra level deep.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've almost pretty much verbatim gone through this whole article by Sung Kim, but I would recommend checking it out. It's a very good article. There's a little bit more info in here, but I listened to this article twice this morning and found a lot of the topics interesting, so I hope you listening also did find it interesting as well. Thank you very much for joining, Elliott.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.